Welcome to Around the Horn in Wholesale Distribution with Kevin Brown and Tom Burton. Sponsored each week by LeadSmart Technologies, Tom, Kevin, and their guests review the news of the week and dive deep into the topics impacting manufacturers, wholesale distribution, independent sales agents, and the global wholesale supply chain. Whether it's M&A, SaaS and cloud computing, B2B e-commerce, or supply chain issues, we peel back the onion with our guests into the topics that impact your business the most.
Good morning.
What's happening?
Not much. I feel like we're empty nesters here compared to last week.
Thinking about that, preparing yesterday and further this morning for today's show. It's like, it's just us.
Yeah.
Oh my word. What's going to happen?
I think we need to go back to the 8 or 10 guests every week.
Yeah. I tell you, it's nice to have a first little comment of the day from Marty, who was with us last week on the show. And for those of you that don't know what we're talking about, today is episode 101 of Around the Horn in Wholesale Distribution and Manufacturing. And last week we celebrated number 100 with just...
Will says guest letdown. Yeah.
So I guess I wasn't dancing. I kind of had my arm going, but I wasn't quite dancing. Sorry, Will. What an ensemble I guess we had last week. We had 7 guests plus the 2 of us. And, our producer and editor, John Taylor, was with us live as well. And now it's 2 old slugs here, us talking again today. But I've got quite a few guests lined up for the rest of the year. It's going to be a good year of guests coming. So, but boy, last week was sure fun, wasn't it?
Yeah, and in the newsletter at the bottom, we'll talk about it. I put the link to the replay in there.
Great.
It's cool to watch the LinkedIn replay because you see all the comments and stuff as they come along as well. So, and I think it's well worth looking at and just watching the LinkedIn. So I put the link to the LinkedIn replay at the bottom.
Yeah, and that's had a lot of additional comments, I think, on there as well. So. Tom, why don't we kind of dive in? We can reference back to that and tell people why we're here. So I'm Kevin Brown. I'm here with my co-founder of our company, LeadSmart Technologies, Tom Burton, and lifelong friend. It's been years and years. We've been together as friends and working together for the last 4 or 5 years now. And we get together every Friday morning on LinkedIn Live, YouTube Live, and Facebook Live. And then later in the day on all the popular podcast formats. And we talk about what's happening in the global economy, U.S. economy, labor markets, supply chain issues, mergers and acquisitions, sales, marketing, people, leadership, all the different topics that we see great articles and great content throughout the week. We bring all that together in our newsletter. Our newsletter, again, is called Around the Horn. And we ship that out on early dark 30 California time, where we both are. To about 10,000, I think almost 11,000 folks get that each week and enjoy that. So if you don't get that newsletter and you would like to, we'd be happy to send it to you. You can do 2 simple things. You can either go to the website for our live show and podcast, which is aroundthehornpod.com, or you can sign up for it there, or you can just send a simple email to hello@leadsmarttech.com, and somebody will get you signed up for that right away. And each week as we get together, we review that newsletter that goes out. So we cover all of the different categories. I think we've got 6 different categories that we cover, and we talk about that. So if you're listening on the podcast, on the recorded version of things, you won't be able to see that newsletter. So hence you might want to sign up for that, or jump on YouTube YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn to the LeadSmart Technologies page, and you can get all of that data. In closing on that, we need to talk about the sponsor of our event each week, which is LeadSmart Technologies. And LeadSmart has developed a vertical-specific, industry-specific, AI-enabled customer intelligence and CRM solution solely developed for wholesale distributors and manufacturers. We have a version for each, and we bring 30-plus years of background in wholesale distribution and manufacturing into the technology world to make pre-developed solutions that help wholesale distributors and manufacturers get deep insights into their customers, their teams, and their businesses that they haven't seen before, which really accelerate growth and help the company gain market share and increase revenues as well. So covered all of that stuff, Tom. The last thing we need to say is if you like what we do each week, please follow the LinkedIn page for LeadSmart Technologies, or YouTube if that's where you're subscribing at. Click the follow button, click the like button, leave a review if you're listening to the podcast. That gets this out to further broadcast out to other people. Did I miss anything there?
Sounds good. And if you're online listening, please jump in, say hi, let us know where you're from.
Awesome.
Always good to hear from people that are listening live.
Yeah. So good news. We've got our newsletter popping up here. So we start each week with talking about the economy and supply chain. So, oh boy, man, what another week. I tell you, I sent you a text earlier in the week and I said, what did I say? I thought there was a 60% chance we might see a cut this week.
Yeah.
Didn't see it, but didn't see it. I'm sure you were happy about that. And I was hoping to see it just so I could throw a picture of the Around the Horn logo on LinkedIn post and then a stake underneath it. But it was interesting because, there's some challenges right now. And I want your take on this as well as anybody that's listening. But, we're at a very precarious place right now. I would say, the Fed right now is at the risk of hero or zero. And there's some big challenges right now because if they wait too long, we could get into a real pickle. And I think the consensus is, certainly the stock market is baking stuff in already, that it's time. I flip on CNBC oftentimes, Tom, at lunchtime and listen to the economic news. And what was it, Wednesday, when Powell was talking, there was the consensus of the guests that they had was we should have cut. So it's interesting timing. Obviously, everybody's got an opinion, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts are that the Fed has very little that they can do about what happens going forward. So even if they were to cut multiple times between now and the end of the year, I don't think that that's going to have much of an impact as to whether or not we get that quote unquote soft landing, as they're talking about in the article,
right? Or
that we avoid a slowdown. I think that's what's happening on the slowdown. And let's look, there's not a lot of data out there, but so you have to kind of piece together the pieces of the puzzle and try and see what's happening. But if you really start to look, right, we've talked about this for months, is the whole consumer debt situation.
Sure.
And I think the consumer debt situation, I don't only think, it's clear from the data, is catching up, and consumers are basically saturated, right? They don't have any more places to spend. Their credit cards are filled up. They've, eaten up their savings. We've eaten up our savings, right? Things like that. So there's just not a lot of dry powder in the consumer world that's there. The consumer, as we know, drives a lot of the economic growth one way or the other. Mm-hmm. That may be helped a little bit by a rate cut because your interest rates on your credit cards and so forth are, but I don't think that changes the fact that do you have more dry powder to go spend as a consumer all that much. I also think some of the hiring things that we're seeing is not necessarily directly related to business slowdown. I think there's a lot of trepidation on hiring because of, well, should I be hiring? Should I wait to see how AI plays out? I think there's a lot of questions that companies are asking before they're making a hire. And I don't think it's directly related to, hey, we don't have the money or the budget or whatever on those two things happening.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's it'll be interesting to see. I just don't think there's a direct correlation that is going to exist between the Fed cutting rates and whether or not we have a slowdown or a soft landing. I don't think there's a lot of interrelationship. There's some impact or influence. I'm not saying they're completely independent, but they're not directly, in my opinion, directly correlated.
Well, it's an interesting thought. I mean, there was a comment in here from one of the economists in this article. This was a Reuters article that talked about soft landings don't materialize from waiting too long. And, so that to me was kind of intriguing. I think we're at a place, the more I think about it and look at and kind of listen to some of the arguments, I don't think a quarter point cut this week would have been a bad idea. I think it would have signaled something, right? And and again, we have to say this every week. Neither of us just I don't know about you. I took 2 economics classes in college, I think is what I took. But I think the reality out of this is that, a quarter of a point or 250 basis points is not going to change things for the negative as much as it could change things for the positive. I think what that would be signaling is, hey, from the Fed is, hey, we see and acknowledge kind of what the stock market is already baking in and what sentiment of people is in general of expecting that. Let's start something and then see what happens, because I don't see that, that 0.25% cut, even if things ticked back up slightly, is going to have that big of a difference.
I tend to agree. I don't think it's going to have that big of it may have more of an emotional impact than it does an actual real impact. But, clearly I think that if there's anything that they're concerned about, is the last thing that they want to do is cut and then go, oh crap, now we got to raise again. Right. So, and clearly there must be some idea or some percentage of, percentage probability that may happen in their minds. That's, again, we're not at the meetings. We don't have all the insight, but there must be some of that in there. But yeah, I think it could have had a bit of an emotional positive impact.
Yeah, I just, there's a quote in here. It said, market observers have recently questioned whether the Fed has left rates at elevated levels for too long, potentially hurting the chances of pulling off the soft landing, where it lowers inflation without badly hurting growth. And so there's a pretty big issues at risk right now with waiting too long. And at my point is with that is, look, if the rates end up going from 5.5 to 5.25, between 5 and 5.25 versus 5.25 and 5.5, does that change that much in the economy? Probably not, And so to start this process might be good, with the idea of finding that balancing level, because as this article talks about, and you're seeing more and more on the news, is there's a risk of waiting too long, and there's significant damage that can come out of waiting too long. So
yeah, and then to my point, I just don't think that's a factor. Okay. I don't think that the waiting too long, or even the volume or the degree that they're cutting, is going to make a difference one way or the other as to whether or not we have a soft landing or a recession or whatever. I think in my opinion, we're past that point. Okay. And it's other factors, it's other dynamics other than the interest rates that are determining whether or not we're going to have economic growth or a slowdown.
Well, the risk, right, is the big recessionary risk of the other extreme, and that's what people are worrying about, right? Is what happens all of this, and I think what we need to find a way is to get, and to your point earlier, and you've been saying this forever, is the consumer is still spending, right? Well, now that's flattening out because they're tapped out, right? Okay, well, now what? You've got that happening, and we've got super high rates, and we have the risk on the other side of it. And it's probably time. Will Quinn comments here, his hashtag one cut in 24, which, you might, Will, you just picked sides, dude. Trader. I do think the longer they wait, unless we see, because we're seeing good news, right, within the labor market, and we're seeing week after week, we're seeing good news. I think the longer that they wait, the more pressure there's going to be to do maybe even a 0.5 point cuts versus a 1/4 point cut, and multiple of them this year. So we'll see. The jury's still out. We don't want to spend all day on this, but I believe it's time.
Okay. Well, I think for sure we will see one in September. Not for sure. I think high probability we will see one in September, barring any strange data between now and then. What I don't know is what will happen after that. I think that if they move too quickly, they could spook the market as well, because then they're like, "Whoa, wait a minute, we are in a recession," or we are, it's there's a lot of dynamics, and it's not, as you've said all the way along, it's not as simple as just A or B. But anyway, I just don't think overall at a macro level, in my opinion, whether they cut 2 points or 5 points or, cut it in half or whatever, is going to have that much difference as to whether or not we have growth or we have a recession or a slowdown in 2025.
You don't think wait a minute, let's pause on that for a second. I want to make sure I understand. So you're suggesting is if we went from rates at 5.25 down to 3.25, you don't think that would stimulate the economy in a significant way?
I don't think it would change the situation we have right now. It doesn't change the consumer situation of being tapped out. It doesn't change the job market situation and some of the trepidation that exists there. I mean, it might help some, like we talked about last week on the show, it might help some of the businesses we're in.
I think it stimulates a lot of spending at a business level.
I think, as we said last week, I think in certain verticals it does. Mm-hmm. But I think overall, at a macro level, I don't think it makes much difference.
So maybe we're spending too much time on this. I'll ask you one more question about that because I'm intrigued, right? And I wouldn't argue what you're saying, but what comes to my mind related to that is, when you think about, I think you used the word tapped out earlier, right? Is savings is gone for the average, for many consumers. Credit card levels are very high, right? But if you took 1 or 2% out of that frees up cash for that individual. And that individual that's in that spot is probably there because of 2 reasons. One is they're overextended, or 2, they're spenders in general. And if they're spenders in general, that they're going to spend that money that's going to go right back into the economy.
But it's not going to be that much, right? I mean, if you look at credit card interest rates, which are sometimes 20%, 25%, depending upon where you are. I mean, I have decent credit, and the credit cards we have, I think, are 20% or somewhere around those. So even if there's a rate cut, you're not going to see a massive difference. You might see it go down to 18% or 17% or whatever. You're still going to have high interest rates on consumer debt. It's probably going to take a while to trickle through to some of the other things that are there. So I just don't think it's going to have that much of a overall impact. I think we're past that.
Okay.
That's all. And I do agree that in certain verticals, like we talked about last week on the show, for sure, there will definitely be some impacts. But at a macro level, I don't think it's going to be a catalyst one way or the other as to whether or not we end up in recession or we end up in a growing economy overall.
Fair enough.
So,
we'll see. You know what? My hope is when we do our year in review in January, and hopefully we can get some of those esteemed guests from last week back with us again. My hope is that we have a lot to talk about in what's going on with the economy. Hopefully we're chugging along like we're supposed to be, and we've seen some cuts. And
and I think it's probably the most confusing economic environment that I've witnessed in my lifetime.
Yeah, I can't remember anything like this.
Yeah, and I do think that the job market, which is what caused the stock market to drop today, right? The low job thing. As I said, I don't believe that is entirely or even really driven based around the, hey, we're just not, whoa, we got to stop spending money. I just think there's trepidation on how companies are thinking, how they're going to use resources and resources they really need. And, do I make that big step in hiring, or do I still wait and see is AI or other, optimization efficiency tools going to allow me to not have to make that hire? So we've never really had that scenario, if you will,
right? That
we're struggling with. So there's a lot of dynamics.
It's
very confusing.
Yeah. Well, and it's frustrating is, we've used the term in this discussion, our weekly discussion here forever. We've talked about this simmering, right? We got hiccups, ups and downs, but we don't have any nice, consistent movement in any one direction. And that's, obviously we're doing okay right now with it that way. And I think that's what the Fed's looking at. But you had mentioned the job report that came out this morning. And that was interesting because, it talked about, this was for, I don't know what the market's doing right now, but the NASDAQ had fallen 10% after a disappointing jobs report. And it's interesting because they call it, I'm just going to quote from this. It says, U.S. stocks tumbled across the board on Friday after the July jobs report showed more cooling in the labor market, fueling concerns the Federal Reserve's higher for longer interest rate stance might end in recession. So I think that goes back to,
I think there's a lot of lobbying that's going to go on that says, oh, it's all the Fed's fault. It's the Fed's fault. It's the Fed's fault. I just don't believe that to be entirely true, right? That's an easy way out of it, going, oh, it's the Fed's fault. They should have cut sooner. There's a lot more to it.
I think there is, but I think what what was it? Was it Bernanke that had the Fed chair that had the debacle? Trying to remember which one of the Fed chairs had the huge debacle in the 80s and early 90s. And I think it was early 90s. And I think there's a lot of this that Powell's trying to avoid that. And I used the term earlier today, hero or zero. And I think you got to be careful. I think the pressure is getting really high. And, he can say all he wants. And to your point, right, I think everybody's at a spot now. I think one of the articles I was reading earlier today said consensus on Wall Street was 87% of the survey was definitely a cut in September, and maybe as much as a half a point. I think there's, Powell can say all day long, that they're not impacted by, the elections or whatever it is. You got to know that there's one side of the aisle right now is pressing for, there's nothing worse that could happen to the sitting president right now and the Democratic Party than for us to dip into a recessionary state in September, October. I mean, nothing worse could happen to that. So I think there is quite a bit of pressure. So let's see what late September holds, I guess.
Yeah, and I'll hit Will's comment, then we'll move on here. I think this isn't something we've talked a lot about, but he says the biggest issue is overspending, putting the country further in debt. We now pay more to service the national debt as we do on national defense, right? I mean, over a third of the GDP is government spending.
Yep.
And, that's an area as well that isn't getting talked a lot about, right? But it is a situation as well, which is completely, I won't say completely different. It's different than the consumer debt situation, but it's still a situation of overspending. Right. And at some point,
we'll plug real quick, Tom. Sorry, we'll plug real quick one of the other podcasts that you and it's probably my second favorite podcast besides this wonderful one. And that's the All In podcast. And that's, some technology executives who've got, former Google, former Facebook, former Yammer, Microsoft executives that come together each week and they talk about the economy. They talk about, without the spin on wholesale distribution, they talk about a lot of what we do. But there's a big discussion there consistently about the debt. And, that may be something we should talk about a little bit more. But today we need to move on because we've talked a lot.
If we don't move on, we're going to be here till like lunchtime. So
yeah, I don't have time for that today. But before we do, let's just talk quickly about that article we have posted here about the Panama Canal. It's raining earlier. We talked in this segment that we talk about the economy, we talk about supply chain, but we've been talking very consistently for the last probably year and a half now about the issue with Panama Canal and the drought. 2023 was the driest year on record, or third driest year on record in Panama. And so you've got the lake on the other side of that, lowered, the Panama Canal, less water in it, they can move less ships through it on a consistent basis with that, and it has slowed things down dramatically. This article just talks about lakes rising, and with the lake rising, they're able to move a few extra ships a day through. And as I first read this, I was thinking, well, what's the difference? I think they said they're moving to 36 vessels from 34 vessels a day. And it triggered me, so I looked it up, and what at top level is like 36 to 40. It can't do more than that. But then I started thinking about it. Well, man, what does that mean? That's such a small increase. But then when you stop and think about it, that some of the container ships are carrying 20,000 containers, right? You move, in this case, just 2 more ships a day through, right? You could have 40,000 additional containers. And that is significant, right? That are moving from, and that's how Asian stuff is getting to the East Coast of the U.S. and one of the routes to Europe as well. And with the issues in the Suez Canal, those 2 ships or those 30 to 40,000 containers a day become very impactful.
Do you know what the maximum is if everything was all back to normal? Is there
40? Yeah,
40.
I looked it up this morning, 40.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, we're getting close. It's not,
Yeah, no. But what triggered for me on that, Tom, was the idea that it's less about the number of ships and more about what's on them.
Yep, agreed. Right.
And it just astounds me when you start thinking about 40-foot containers that see on the back of a truck going down the street, that you could put 20,000. Some container ships can actually carry more than that. You put 20,000 of those on one ship, and then you start thinking about the electrical wires, the connectors, the valves that are going to, the raw materials that are going to a manufacturing plant, the dust masks that are private labeled by a distributor in Minnesota or whatever it might be. The amount of those things that are going through there that are impacting manufacturers and wholesale distributors, 1,000, 10,000 containers have great magnitude to it.
Yeah.
So anyways, we're going to continue to watch this. One of the issues at hand right now that we're still going to be paying very close attention to is in September, is we have I can't remember the name of the labor union, but the Gulf Coast and East Coast of the U.S.'s port workers are threatening to go on strike. That's not been alleviated yet. Hopefully that doesn't happen, because when you put a strike in those areas, can have a major impact on getting goods and materials through to wholesale distribution and manufacturing. So.
All right, where do we want to go next?
Yeah, manufacturing and distribution. We can talk briefly. The article that we posted today here was related to Chinese manufacturing activity seemed extending decline in July. Previous declines, they were starting to talk about nearshoring and onshoring of other countries and things moving to Southeast Asia versus China. So this is kind of interesting. They're tying in this article, I don't know if you caught that, but they're tying a lot of this what's going on with the struggles that they're having to a depressed, they say the article quotes, depressed domestic consumption is closely related to falling property values that have left families feeling poor, as 70% of household wealth is in real estate. And they're really struggling. So that's on their consumption of things internally, as people aren't spending money because 70% of their wealth is tied into their house and their market's crashing there.
Well, and it also says job insecurity, right?
Yeah,
and I would suspect that job insecurity is very high amongst, and when is the Chinese New Year?
Usually February-ish.
Yeah, it's usually February, right? And that's when everybody goes away for a month, and sometimes they come back and sometimes they don't, or whatever.
Yeah, you're exactly right with that. And that's, and that's going to be impacted on this by this housing thing as well. And do you want me to unpack what you were just saying there just slightly about that, people coming back or not?
Yeah, I just think if there's job insecurity, right? People are, just like anything else, they're going to be nervous about spending and then you have your wealth factor, and that's doesn't help the situation either.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. There's I'll call it a global phenomena of Chinese New Year that happens. And if you're on the manufacturing or distribution side, you for a lot of years, you'll have felt this, is that you come into what we're already into the new year, and we have Chinese New Year, and basically manufacturing shuts down for a minimum of 2 weeks, oftentimes as much of a month, which gives people an opportunity to get on a train or a bus and go the 20-hour ride back to the province that they're originally from. And if you're a factory worker at pennies a day and you're having dinner with your cousin over Chinese New Year, and your cousin says, I make 2 pennies more a day than you do, 3 provinces away, you're not even showing up back at your job. You're just going to that job hoping to get a spot there. And I've had, my experience in manufacturing and distribution both. I've been impacted by this significantly. I did some work with a manufacturing company in the low voltage electrical world and electronics world as well a while back. And it was a huge factor that we had to plan for. And then imagine if you're the guy running that plant that says maybe 10% of your workforce isn't coming back after Chinese New Year. So big impact with these things. I do think this is just part of our ongoing discussion, though, about, as we talk about this, is watching what happens with, we've been watching for years now, things moving at some level from, you've got some electronics, a lot of glove latex and nitrile gloves. It's kind of always been at some level in Southeast Asia, but a lot of other things moving into Vietnam and Laos and Thailand and then across into the Philippines as well. And I think we're going to see more of that. And then we've been talking consistently on this show about Mexico and Latin America and nearshoring there. So I think we're going to continue.
I think China's unfortunately got a real problem.
Well, they do. And the other side of that is all the geopolitical pressure that goes with that right now related to Taiwan and so forth.
And tariffs and everything else that go along with it. So.
Exactly right. Great point about the tariffs. So, all right, jumping ahead to e-commerce and our marketing section. You want to jump in on that, get us started on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I found this interesting. We were chatting about this earlier. Amazon is responsible for hazardous items sold by third-party sellers because they've been basically deemed as a distributor. And so and again, you know much more about this than I do, but what it looks like to me is if you're deemed as a quote-unquote distributor, then you are responsible for items that need recall or have faulty items or whatever as the distributor.
Yeah.
Versus the manufacturer of those items.
Well, and typically the distributor in the world that we talk to the most, the distributor is going back to the manufacturer on those settings, but they've got to play a role in this.
Sure.
And what Amazon has been avoiding is through all of this is they've been showing themselves as a e-commerce provider and not a distributor. And now what the Consumer Product Safety Commission says, no, you can't just shuffle this off. You played a role in this and you have to play a role in solving these problems as well. So
what is the protocol between an e-commerce provider and a distributor? Is there some...
I don't know exactly how that's worked historically, but I think Amazon has just been kind of trying to wash their hands of all of this. Right?
Yeah. And
of course, they've already said they're going to appeal all of this. But I think you're going to see a lot of pressure from a lot of places that are going to make people rethink this. This was tied to, this ruling says that they're going to be responsible legally for the recall of more than 400,000 products for the hairdryers and defective carbon monoxide detectors, just that they've been involved with. And, it doesn't mean that they're having to bear all the burdens of replacing the product, right? The manufacturer is still going to be involved with that.
But they have to handle the logistics, right? Which is
right. And now exactly right. Which is part of what happens, right? If you sell a power tool or whatever it is now, and you're, Joe's Tool and Equipment in Biloxi, Mississippi, you've always been saddled with that and been participating in that process. And what's interesting about this is it's kind of frustrating. It's just the right thing to do, to be part of the solution for your customer with this. So it's interesting how this is going to play out. They just, I think they want to stay away from getting saddled with that term distributor because
I totally get it.
I don't know this, but my assumption is there's some other tax implications and some other things that go with that. I think there's a bigger issue, and it's why we come together each week. Is we use the term, I think, in the intro to the podcast recording that John does for us is we talk about peeling back the onion. If you peel back the onion on this one's kind of intriguing and interesting to me from a standpoint, and we've talked about this before. When Amazon Supply started, now Amazon Business, when Amazon Supply started, they basically said, look, we're going after the Graingers of the world, because I think the number was at the time, I think Grainger was doing $3 billion through eCommerce. And obviously that's a place, and Amazon says, and I'll share this again. I've shared it before. I was having dinner. I remember the restaurant and the event and so forth, and who was there. Having dinner with a couple of Amazon executives, one middle management and one upper middle management. And it turned out at that particular event, my wife was with us. And I think Darlene had mentioned something about, the breadth of what they sell. And I asked them, based upon that discussion, kind of something along the lines of, well, what wouldn't you sell, or something like that. And the executive's response was, I think it was if it's legal, and I think he said reasonably moral and can go in a box, we'll sell it. And so when you take that mindset and then you look at the logistics network of Amazon, to say, well, why wouldn't I sell power tools? And why wouldn't I sell X, Y, and Z, right? In that case. And so that's what they've done. I did want to hit Tom, but I'm going to pause here for a second. You want to hit Jason's comment? I really appreciate this. And Jason's an e-commerce expert out there that really speaks well to this. This is just putting Amazon to the same standards as traditional distribution, right? So Jason's somebody that we want to get as a guest to come with us later this year. We've just recently met through LinkedIn, but to appreciate those comments. But when Amazon went down this path, what they were basically doing is saying, I'm going to sell the same stuff that you sell in your brick and mortar with all of your people out there, whether it's a Milwaukee tool or a 3M respirator, and I'm going to sell it in my format on my e-commerce platform, and I'm going to go after your customers everywhere you're at. Most distributors have seen that as a huge threat. There's a lot of them that, I remember being at a buying groups meeting last fall. I don't know if you were with me at the event. I don't know if you were in this session. We had two distributors up there that both do e-commerce. One of them embraces Amazon by being partnered with Amazon, and the other one looks at Amazon as the devil. But what I think has happened that manufacturers have had to look at over the last, I'll say 10 plus years is, look, Amazon is just another distributor. They're another resource for distribution that end users are going to buy from. If I was a manufacturer, I'd really be looking at this as a great thing to them being categorized that way, because now when my distributors who hate Amazon want to put pressure on me as a manufacturer, why do I sell through Amazon and you're ruining the marketplace and so forth? We've got this balancing act. At the end of the day, right, and I'd love Jason's thoughts on this further, is Amazon is here. Amazon's here to stay. We've got Brian Beck that joins us occasionally from Seba, and they work with Amazons on their Amazon presence. I wish I had saved the information. Brian sent some information out in his newsletter this week about their manufacturing clients' presence on Amazon, the growth that they had with Prime Day. But I think this is going to help leveling the playing field a little bit is the hope, right? That's the takeaway.
It seems to me, is Amazon being classified as a distributor? Wouldn't that be the same as Zorro? Isn't Zorro would be classified as a distributor?
Well, 100%. And Zorro's part of Grainger. And
right, understood. Right.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, anyway.
Yeah. And Zorro, I don't think Zorro's hiding from anything with that, right?
So I think Jason's right. I think the ruling just holds Amazon to the same standards, and I think it's a good thing. I think it's going to cost them some dollars and some effort, but I don't think it's a bad thing.
I mentioned we talked about this briefly ahead of time. I don't know if anybody's with us from NAW today, but I think I might throw this question out to some of our friends at the National Association of Wholesale Distributors as their view on this, because to Jason's point again, I think anything we can do to get this playing field balanced will be beneficial to wholesale distribution and manufacturing. So it's good stuff. All right. Tax-hungry states, e-commerce delivery fees to fund road repair. Well, not surprising, right?
Not surprising.
How do we try and get in somebody else's pocket as quick as we can? But an interesting article. This was a Reuters article as well. And there's states that are doing this already and pushing on taxes and so forth, which is good. But New York, Ohio, Nevada, Minnesota, Colorado, and Washington are looking at very specific ways to tax delivery fees, which is interesting in that setting, because from that, and one of them was just talking about a 35 cent, this particular one was 27 cents, and another one was 35 cents of an impact on a delivery fee. And that's just going to come to you and me, right? If we're looking at it from an e-commerce standpoint, it's just going to get tacked on to delivery fees already. So Prime is going to go up by 37 cents or, whatever it might be.
It was something I haven't really thought about it. Obviously, as you know, we moved recently, and
I do know that
we're in a neighborhood that's like a cul-de-sac, so there's not a lot of traffic on there. And I look out the window from it, and I've just been noticing all day long, the only traffic that comes down the street is a Prime truck, a UPS truck, and a FedEx truck. And every once in a while, like another delivery type truck. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's necessarily a lot of and these are heavy equipment, right? These are things definitely impact the quality of the road and on all that stuff. So I don't know that I'm not sure I'm a big fan of using taxes for that, but I can see where, obviously there's an impact to the infrastructure and the roads as a result of the increased number of these delivery trucks out there. So,
well, I mean, they're and look, what's funny, I'm here in my home office and I hear a truck outside, and so it's literally, that's pretty funny timing, and it's probably Mrs. Brown getting a package. But there is, and I live on an even smaller cul-de-sac with 12 houses, and there is more, put it this way, there is as much or more traffic from e-commerce delivery trucks coming than there is residents.
Yeah. By far here.
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing, but to your point, right? Big, heavy trucks. If you live in a major metropolitan area, the majority of vehicles you probably see out there are, Amazon, and it would be great to know the statistics related to Amazon's fleet growth in the last 3 to 5 years. They have their own airline now as well for their packages. So anyways, I do think there's some value in the impact that e-commerce deliveries are having, but at the same time, it's, where it's going to get passed onto, right? It's coming straight to the consumer.
Just like gas taxes or anything else. Yeah.
That's it. Good. All right, let's jump into our last segment here in our e-commerce and marketing segment, where we've got experience as everything for B2B buyers. It's not something new for us to talk about this, but some increasing statistics, I think, is what we're seeing.
It's funny, speaking of moving and all that, because we've moved and all the turmoil, right? We've been doing takeout orders way more in the last month than we ever have probably in the last 5 years. And it was funny, last night we were about ready to order something again, and I didn't want to order from restaurants that have had a bad experience on their online ordering. So I made a decision to order from a restaurant because we probably ordered from, 10 restaurants, I guess, since we've been here.
Just keep going back to that Thai place. It was great.
Yeah.
I was up there.
But I just found it interesting. I didn't necessarily make my decision based on the food quality or even what I was quote unquote hungry for. My decision was being driven off the experience that I was going to have to go through on the online e-commerce site. Now, obviously, that's a very simple consumer example, but I think that is exactly what they're saying here. And we've talked about it in the B2B world, is if the experience is not there, I'm just going to go find somewhere else to buy.
Yeah. No,
and even if pricing is better, right? Even if pricing is better, I may still go and find somewhere else to buy.
So this is going to impact wholesale distribution a lot in the fact of contracts. And I think what's going to start happening is, in this could be happening already, and I'm just not aware. It's been a long time since I've been calling on manufacturing or construction or whatever it is in the field. But there are, when we put supply chain contracts or supply contracts in place with a manufacturing plant or wherever it might be, is we're going to start seeing more and more of expectations growing on the e-commerce side of fulfillment of that, right? Because if they want to order in that setting, if they want to order online, their experience, there's no reason not to put some expectations of the experience into the contract. If you're a large company and you've got 20 distributors that want your contract, and say 7 of those, and 20 is probably large, say 10, and 4 of those 10 are highly capable of fulfilling your needs, you could start putting in expectations of the e-commerce experience that goes with that, because online web store ordering and all of the pieces that more, and we're just seeing the statistics going up every day of how much more that's being used. So I think it's going to be something to watch pretty close. Mm-hmm. So anyway, some good statistics in that article. Good stop to hit pause for just a second. Those of you who are with us live today, you're seeing the newsletter that we put out every week on the screen, and that is called Around the Horn in Wholesale Distribution and Manufacturing. It goes out, as I mentioned earlier today, to about 10,000 people. If you don't get that and you would like to, please just, you could, even if you're here live with us and you don't get it, you can pop up a note in the comments. But Easiest way to do it is hello@leadsmarttech.com to get you signed up for that. Or secondly, go to the website for our weekly podcast and live show, which is www.aroundthehornpod.com. Past episodes are there, registration or subscription to the podcast formats, Apple, Spotify, all the top ones are there as well. And you can subscribe there and we'll get you in the newsletter. Which brings me to the final point related to that is that if you're listening and not seeing, you may want to get this newsletter, because if you're listening to the podcast later and not seeing the newsletter, you might certainly want to do that. So last piece of that is hit the subscribe, hit the follow button, leave a review, and this will get out to more people. So next article, Tom, we move into technology, cybersecurity, and AI. California DMV puts 42 million car titles on the blockchain to fight fraud. This might seem odd when we talk about wholesale distribution, but we're going to bring this full circle.
Yeah, I didn't know about this until you put the article in here. I think that's amazing. I don't know if I'm one of them. I hope I am. Yeah. And basically what they're doing is they're using, you've all heard the term NFT, right? Non-fungible token, which kind of
is on the way. We don't hear much about that anymore.
Well, because once AI came in, it sort of trumped all the hype that was going on with NFTs, and plus, all the money that was being put into these, meme NFTs and so forth. But the concept of an NFT is exactly what they've done. They've taken the title of your car and they put it on the blockchain, and you get issued an NFT. And
a non-fungible token.
That's right. And now transferring makes things a lot easier. There's a lot less opportunity for fraud. We sold a car a few years ago, right? I had to go find the pink slip, give it to the guy, meet him, all that goes away with this. And so it's going to make the transaction process a lot smoother. And I think this is going to be, I hope it works well, because I think this will open the door for really all types of ownership, even home ownership, car ownership, even things that you buy, right? Refrigerators and all of that kind of stuff. The things that can be done with that on warranties and so forth really, really open the door, I think, to a much more efficient way of tracking and managing ownership. So this was good news to me.
Yeah, the fraud component of it is really solid too, right? That's what really triggered for me was, and they're talking about you being able to transfer titles from a mobile app that's going to be being built and so forth. But there's all kinds of fraud that goes with liens and so forth. And I think we're going to see this as well in the escrow world for cars soon, which is, I think, very interesting for us as well, because, we hear all these things about, cyber fraud and so forth, and people, capturing your home title and so forth, and having liens there that aren't real. And so I think this will be a nice application to see this as well. The other thing that this article talked about, though, that because of the tool that they're using for the blockchain application here is called Avalanche, from a company called Ava Labs, and that Deloitte is working with them on a new disaster recovery platform for the government to use and FEMA to use post-disaster. Because we hear all the time about people on a consistent basis after disaster that they are waiting in line for days or whatever to file a claim, and the claims get lost or whatever it is. So this seems like another good application. I think it's going to be interesting too. And let me ask you a question maybe related to this, because you're much more up on blockchain. But I can start kind of thinking about when you're if we think about the manufacturing distribution world. You've got people dealing with RFID tags and stuff like that, and that's one thing. But, when we start thinking about, like, whether it's medical devices or gas detection equipment or highly regulated and highly and expensive and critical infrastructure components, probably tracking those with NFTs in the distribution and manufacturing world and an end user world would probably be really valuable as well, wouldn't it?
I would think so. And I would think the aftermarket for those things would make the aftermarket way bigger and easier. Yeah. And even the secondhand market, right? I assume that, people buy some of these large things and want to sell them to others and things like that. The warranty, there's just, when you really think about it, and all the things that are done now through paper and logistically difficult ways of handling things, there's just a lot that could be streamlined all the way around with using NFTs as a way to identify ownership and the attributes that are associated with it, right? That's the beauty of it, is that you can basically put any number of attributes on that NFT that then lives on that NFT.
Tell me what do you mean by how did that attribute part work?
Well, I mean, you were saying earlier, right? It could even be, I have an NFT of for my house or my car. Let's say it's my car, but
right.
Then I have a loan on that. There's certain, there's if it's a lease, it could be a lease versus a loan. It could be all kinds of different things, right? So there's different attributes that are associated with that ownership and how that ownership is actually done.
Yep.
Do I have the long-term warranty? Do I have the this? Do I have the that? Those are all attributes of that ownership that I would potentially want to. I mean, how many things have you bought where you may have bought like a warranty, but you can't remember if you got it or not? And if something did happen, where would you find it? And, all that kind of stuff.
Yep. So great application there that you've described, right? And this is warranty related. I think that's where we would really see it well in a manufacturing distribution world. Cool. So we're still here in our technology and cybersecurity world. Microsoft faulty CrowdStrike update affected 8.5 million users. I'll tell you my first takeaway, and I want to talk to you about this because, part of what people are saying about this, they're saying 1% of Windows machines were infected. The problem is of that 8.5 million, whose they were, right? When it's impacting United Airlines, it's a whole different story than, Kevin Brown's, PC. So it's pretty astounding of who it impacted versus how many.
Yeah, and I don't know if there was any sort of selection as to the 1%. Were they more enterprise type customers? It's not clear from the article anyway. That is, was there certain characteristics of that 1% that, again, lead to, I know that one of the biggest issues, right, in most companies, larger companies, they don't allow you to go in and change your software on your Windows. You have to take it to IT and get updates and all of that kind of stuff, which obviously makes then the issue of addressing this more complicated than if you have your own computer and you can, do your own updates and all that. But yeah, I don't know if this was leaned or skewed towards more enterprise type situations or not.
Well, it's interesting, and I think this was tied to, obviously, it was tied to an update. Security updates typically get pushed, right, to everybody's computer. So you're not going to have, my next door neighbor's computer wasn't going to get impacted because the likelihood of them using CrowdStrike was slim and none, right? It's an enterprise solution in most cases, and that's where it was getting pushed out. I heard a really cool example. I can't remember if it was. I have a really close friend, and he's senior level guy with a major multinational. It's interesting. His company he works for Allied Universal and a huge security provider, but he works on the cybersecurity and cyber threat side of things within their business. So they have everything from a mall cop to a cybersecurity division to a bodyguard, and that works within hundreds of thousands of employees. And he said one of the calls that he was, because this impacted them, one of the calls he was on was tied to 17 hours with a series of vendors for them that were on one Zoom call, people coming in and out and jumping back on and solving different fixes. But it might have been him that was telling me this example, but there was a number of companies who were able to figure it out based upon time zones. They saw what was happening. They hit pause on the update before it got out and impacted everybody. And basically, what they were able to do is remotely return off and limit access to the internet for a great percentage of their employees based upon different time zones. So let's just say Eastern time, somebody jumps on and just disables Central and West, Pacific time. So they couldn't get those updates until they solved the problem. And they said, okay, you can now launch your computer again. But one of the fixes that this article talks about is that what Microsoft was suggesting in this setting as well was tied to, go on another safe device, go and download this file to a USB port. Do you imagine being an IT director for a large company and having to go tell your people, oh, go on your wife's Mac and download this file to USB port and then put this on your company computer?
Yeah.
Pretty big impact.
Yeah.
I spent some time looking at, sadly, at LinkedIn of all the people that were traveling that were posting the blue screens of death on the airport monitor. It's pretty sad. So anyways, hopefully we don't see this again. Now we know, pay closer attention to your, and side note on that, I think CrowdStrike is one of the biggest names in cybersecurity.
Oh, by far. Yeah.
Right?
Windows. Yeah, absolutely.
And I know Elon Musk came out and said they will have no business with any of his companies.
Yep.
They're moving beyond all of that. So anyways, jumping into our sales and M&A segment, we'll talk just kind of real quick. There's only a couple of articles there this week. 3M had some nice updates to some growth within their safety and industrial business. We'll happily see some of those people at some upcoming affiliated distributors and Net Plus Alliance and ISA events and so forth. So that's good. Some expansion and growth through acquisitions at Southern Glazer Wine and Spirits. The beverage distribution company is good. And then there was an article that we posted here about 8 tips to master remote sales team management. A lot of these are fairly generic in that article. But if you get the newsletter and you're a sales leader, it's worth looking at some of them. More of and we end up this way once in a while, Tom, where we post some articles that's got some generic stuff, and I don't mind doing those things because even the stuff that seems common sense, there's just really good reminders.
It's good to get reminded on some of the stuff, right?
To trigger those things. Yeah. So jumping into our people and leadership segment, I didn't know that U.S. employee engagement and satisfaction was tracked in the way it is. But there's a Gallup survey that's put in here that after hitting an 11-year low in the first quarter of 2024, U.S. employee engagement improved slightly in Q2, and both tracking an increase of American workers and full and part-time workers feeling involved and enthusiastic about their work. So
what this is saying is that only 32% of people are, what would you just say, involved and enthusiastic?
Fully engaged, feeling involved and enthusiastic.
I mean, that's pretty scary. Right. I mean, I know this is what Dirk was, certainly talking about last week and talks a lot about is, and certainly in a people business, right, of, wholesale distribution and so forth. Boy, I don't know how these numbers are by different industries, but that's pretty scary.
Yeah, it is. And hopefully they didn't talk about, having not returned to pre-pandemic levels, but they have improvement there. So I think it's kind of neat it's something I want to pay a little closer attention now to. And I might text, you did mention Dirk Beveridge with We Supply America Tour and Unleash WD. And Dirk is the champion in wholesale distribution of people. And, it's crediting Dirk that we have this segment of the show about people and leadership is because Dirk called us out in January when he was with us on the show, and we need to talk more about people. So we're trying to post more of those types of articles. And Tom, I'm going to segue here into the next article. It talks about, it's from Chief Executive Magazine. Next article was, Are You a Gracious Leader? And I thought that was kind of cool because it ties right in because, people are people and people have emotions and feelings and finding that balance of getting efficiency. And you and I, we together jump in a half hour from now, we jump into a meeting with one of the teams within LeadSmart, and we're talking about productivity and expectations for the week and what was accomplished. And there's a difference between being taskmasters and making people feel good and having a culture. And you and I, based upon the company that we run together and started together, we talk about culture all the time. But this article about being a gracious leader, I thought was pretty cool. And it gave a description. It says, a gracious person is one who exudes kindness and courtesy, a person characterized by charm, generosity of spirit, and empathy. And that is a balancing act to do, along with keeping people accountable within a business.
Yeah, I think, and again, by no means am I saying this is easy, right? By no means. But I do think, and they even talked about this here, if you have some clear objectives, you have clear key performance indicators, you have clear goals of what you're trying to accomplish, either at the job level or the department level or the company level, right? I think that, and if people know that, I think it opens the door to being a gracious leader.
Yep.
I think it also, it makes the responsibility of the leader, though, to get rid of the people that no matter what you do are going to be toxic to the organization.
Sure. Yep.
And I think that's one of the biggest issues that, we all do, right? Is we hire somebody who's maybe not the best person for the organization, and we don't make that move fast enough. And
we had that conversation earlier in the week, right? We were talking about, we operate at LeadSmart on the entrepreneurial operating system, the EOS platform. And part of hiring is there's a matrix that you use with that ties to your core values of your company. Yep. And it's so easy. Sometimes we could say, I need that salesperson, or I need that IT person because they're the best, or they're coming from a competitor or whatever. And you can get a toxic environment pretty quickly, to your point.
Well, and I'll hit Will's comment here, right? Because I think this is a great point. It says companies are paying more attention how to raise engagement scores versus fixing the issues that cause poor engagement. That's easier for the leader. I don't think you can force in an engagement score, right? Or that we just went through. You're going to have to build that into the DNA of the organization. And that probably starts with being, the leader and the culture and things that are there. But
I'm sorry, go ahead. Finish it.
No, I just never would have, if you would have asked me what you think the engagement score is in most companies, I would have probably said 60 to 70%. Mm-hmm. I never would have thought 30 to 32% or whatever they're saying there.
Yeah. Yep. Well, it's interesting, but I think it ties back nicely, and this ties to Will's comment too. When you're thinking about, engagement scores, just somebody's trying to report to a board or a private equity group or whoever it might be, is very different than when you have, and a great example, then it doesn't mean they don't have board of directors and so forth, but all the work that we were just talking about Dirk a few minutes ago, Dirk Beveridge, is, as he's traveling the country, seeing wholesale distributors that are family owned, or let's just say independent, right? They might be employee owned or partially employee owned. Great example of that is you can have this, emotionally mature and gracious executive level, which is really looking, and it talks about things about practicing radical security or curiosity, I should say, as a CEO, and being super engaged with your people and being conscious about conflict and orientation and balancing participation. These are the things we see. And as an example, Paul Kennedy was with us last week. The president and CEO of fully and 100% employee-owned Dakota Supply Group. But Paul's just a good human being. He has a board to report to, but his team would go to battle for him and die for him because of the leadership that they have in an organization. And we see that a lot in wholesale distribution, especially in the privately held ones and so forth. So cool article. We try and bring it again, and this segment is newer this year to what we do. So we're going to continue to talk about leadership and people and how to help our people within wholesale distribution manufacturing. So industry scuttlebutt, we talk about each week, just a couple of targets in here. AD, affiliated distributors, announced the record-breaking sales for the first half of the year. Great to see all of the big thing that stuck out for me with them, and at LeadSmart, we're partnered with them as a preferred service provider with AD, and appreciate our partnership with them. We did a webinar with them this week and got all their events coming up. But it was cool to see the growth in Mexico with them. That was really neat to see out of that article. So got a little bit of information there too about global industrials growth. And then an advocacy group is being launched in California to strengthen U.S. supply chain. So a few good reads. I'm reading the newsletter as you're scrolling it, Tom, and I had a few good articles there, which takes us to our good reads section. We try and populate some news each week tying to, it might be leadership, it might be executive health, it might be personal development. It's different all the time. But this article is titled the U.S., this is from Inc. magazine, the U.S. men's gymnastic team just won a medal for the first time in 16 years. and it all comes down to the goldfish rule. So, Tom, you any thoughts on that article?
No, I thought it was great. I think it's something for all of us to be the goldfish rule, meaning, have a 10-second memory, right? And and look, we're all going to screw up, and we're all going to, do things that, God, I wish I would have done something different or handle it differently or whatever. And the point is here, push it aside and move on.
Right.
You can't, as in this article is saying that, hey, look, one of was it Brady Malone? I think they said it was, who had some issues in the pre-qualification or the qualification.
Yeah. And,
then came in the actual finals and just stuck it. And he said, hey, I just had to put it aside. It's like, I can't,
right.
And you see this in other sports, golf and other sports, right? You have to, you can't dwell on your last bad shot.
Yeah.
But I think there's definitely an applicability to this into the business world.
Well, and where this comes from, right? I mean, the immortal Ted Lasso, and that goldfish rule came with it. His quote was, he was talking to a player that was struggling. He says, what the happiest animal on earth is? It's the goldfish. It has a 10-second memory. Go be a goldfish, right? Yeah. So doesn't mean we shouldn't fix our problems. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try and do our best every day. But that's the key. So Will Quinn says, again, he has a goldfish memory. Can't remember people's names. Will, when you meet somebody, use their name 3 times in the first 2 or 3 minutes of discussion, and it will help you greatly in remembering names.
So, I don't know Will's name. I just know he's a distribution guy. That's all I know.
Yeah, that's right. He's the distribution guy. That's it. Very good. All right. Last thing, we publish regularly a second look if we have articles that have been there in the past. We have something about more of the Red Sea crisis there of transiting the Suez Canal, another article there. As we wind down each week, there's a link here. You can get it at the Distribution Strategy Group's website as well. But they do have a great thing where they have a ticker where they're tracking publicly traded distributors there. We have a link to it as well. It takes you to their website. And we appreciate Ian and Jonathan and their team there publishing that each week. We have a calendar of events that we come as well. It's a mix of our work of bringing events together, plus some of what Modern Distribution Management does as well. It's a mix of both of us. And so we've got quite a few events coming up. But Tom, this is where you put the replay, right?
I did. You can see it highlighted there in green.
Yep. So if you missed last week's 100th episode with the cast of characters that we had, you might want to go and watch that one again. It's good.
Yeah, I would highly recommend it. I can't imagine a better overview of some of just the cross section of different issues on distribution that the gentleman that we had on last week covered. So
yeah, and Mike Marks, I sent him a note. I was thanking him. He was extremely well behaved.
Yeah, he was. He even raised his hand when he wanted to talk.
Yeah, that's right. It was good. So as he says, when you have compromising pictures of people, they can behave well. So
all right, let's wrap it up.
That's it. All right. Any big weekend plans? Just unpacking boxes?
Getting there. Yep.
All right. I'm going to get my feet in the Pacific Ocean this week and make a few turns and a few waves and have some fun. So thank you, everybody, for coming together with us. We had some new folks with us this week. We get hundreds of people each week through LinkedIn and Facebook and YouTube, and another hundreds and hundreds on the podcast. We couldn't do this each week without you. We don't do it because we want to do it. We do it because we have great listeners and great feedback and great comments. So thank you for that. And man, 101, Tom, didn't think we'd get there.
And Marty says you need to change your shirt before next week. So I agree.
This isn't. What's funny is you've been wearing that shirt for 3 days, and Marty, this is not the same shirt from last week. I have a closet full of Aloha shirts. I will text you, Marty, the picture of them all. But for those of you that doesn't make any sense to, a somewhat similar Aloha shirt to the one I'm wearing today was a gift that we sent out to all of last week's guests. And Marty, yours should be at the tailor probably, hopefully now. So I'll have a different Aloha shirt. It's the time of the year for that in my household. So we'll go from there. Everybody, thanks for being with us. Tom, I'll appreciate all you do. And our guests that were with us today making comments, thanks so much. We'll look forward to next week. Until that time, be safe, be kind, and do good things.
Have a good weekend.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode and our guests. Each week, we try our best to dig into the topics that are impacting your business. So please reach out to us and let us know how you think we can make the show better, or topics you'd like for us to tackle or talk about more often, and even guests you'd like to see join us. We're looking forward to bringing you next week's session and hope that until then, you stay safe, stay focused, and do great things. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast and leave a review to help others in wholesale distribution get access to the conversation. And finally, please check out our sponsor, LeadSmart Technologies, and their manufacturing and wholesale distribution industry CRM, customer intelligence, and channel collaboration platform. That's LeadSmart Technologies at leadsmarttech.com.